At 64, they made me work as their free maid. I cleaned house by removing them from my life permanently. What happened to me at 64 will shock you. I never thought my own son would stand by while his wife turned me into their personal servant. But sometimes the people who break you also show you exactly who you need to become. Before I tell you this story, please let me know in the comments where you're listening from. I love connecting with people from all over the world. The kitchen clock read 5:47 a.m. when I heard footsteps above my head. My makeshift bed in the laundry room felt colder than usual, and my back ached from sleeping on the thin mattress I'd been given 6 months ago. The washing machine hummed beside me, a constant reminder of where I now belonged in this house, the house I'd helped buy with my life savings. "Rosa, are you up?" Sarah's voice cut through the morning silence like a blade. My daughter-in-law always spoke to me like I was hired help, but today something in her tone made my stomach twist. I wrapped my worn robe around my shoulders and climbed the narrow stairs to the main floor. Sarah stood in the kitchen, already dressed in her expensive workout clothes, scrolling through her phone. She didn't look up when I entered. "Good, you're awake. I need you to start cleaning earlier today. We have guests coming tonight, and this place needs to sparkle." She finally glanced at me, her eyes scanning my appearance with obvious disapproval. "And maybe try to look more presentable when people are here." My throat felt dry. "Sarah, I've been cleaning since I moved in. The house is already—" "Just our help now, Rosa." Her words hit me like a slap. "You're staying with us to help around the house, remember? That was the arrangement." The arrangement. 6 months ago, when I sold my small apartment to help them with their mortgage, when I moved in to help raise little Emma and Jake while working part-time at the grocery store, when I thought I was moving in with family who loved me, how quickly "help us" for a while had become, "you're just our help now." I heard my son David's footsteps on the stairs. My heart lifted slightly. Maybe he would say something, defend me, remind his wife that I was his mother, not their servant. David appeared in the kitchen, already dressed for work, his face buried in his phone. "Morning, Mom," he mumbled without looking up. "David," I started, my voice barely above a whisper, "Sarah wants me to—" "Whatever Sarah needs, Mom. I'm running late." He grabbed his coffee mug and headed for the door. "You two figure it out." And just like that, he was gone. My son, the boy I'd raised alone after his father died, the child I'd worked 3 jobs to support, the young man I'd given my entire savings to so he could buy this house. He walked away while his wife treated me like hired help. Sarah's phone buzzed, and she answered it immediately. "Hey, Jessica!" "Yes, tonight's still on." "Oh, don't worry." "About Rosa. She's Ethan's mom. She lives here rent-free in exchange for chores, so she'll take care of everything." My legs felt weak. Rent-free in exchange for chores. Is that what my life had become? I gripped the kitchen counter, trying to steady myself as Sarah continued her conversation. No, she's not a problem. She keeps to herself, mostly. Just think of her as part of the household staff, you know? Household staff. The woman talking about me like I wasn't standing 3 feet away was describing me as household staff to her friends. This woman who had never worked a day in her life, who spent her mornings at yoga and her afternoons shopping with money my son earned and I had helped provide. I backed away slowly, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The laundry room suddenly felt like a prison, but it was the only space in this house I could call my own. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the family photo I'd taped to the wall, David's high school graduation, both of us smiling, his arm around my shoulders. He'd whispered, "Thank you for everything, Mom, that day." Where was that boy now? The truth crashed over me like a wave. This wasn't temporary. This wasn't help between family. This was my new reality. A 64-year-old woman living in a laundry room, cleaning house for people who saw her as nothing more than free labor. My mind drifted back to how it all started. It seemed like yesterday, but it was actually 3 years ago when David first brought Sarah home. She was beautiful, confident, and 20 years younger than my 35-year-old son. I was happy for him. He'd been lonely for so long after his divorce, working constantly to pay child support and rebuild his life. "Mom, I want you to meet someone special," he'd said that Sunday dinner. Sarah had walked into my small but tidy apartment with a bright smile and a bottle of expensive wine. "Mrs. Martinez, David has told me so much about you," she'd said, though I noticed she never asked me to call her by my first name the way David's ex-wife had. Those early months were pleasant enough. Sarah was polite, always perfectly dressed, and clearly smitten with my son. She worked part-time at an art gallery, spent weekends browsing farmers markets, and talked about wanting to start a family. David seemed happier than I'd seen him in years. When they announced their engagement, I was thrilled. When Sarah got pregnant 6 months later, I felt like my prayers had been answered. David would have the family he'd always wanted, and I would have grandchildren to spoil. But pregnancy changed Sarah. She became demanding, emotional, and somehow convinced that everyone should cater to her every need. When little Emma was born, Sarah's mother flew in from California to help, and suddenly my offers to babysit or bring meals were met with polite refusals. "Sarah's mom has it handled," David would say. "Maybe next week." Next week never came. Sarah's mother stayed for 3 months, and when she finally left, Sarah hired a nanny instead of asking for my help. I tried not to feel hurt, tried to remind myself that new mothers need space, that everyone does things differently. Then Jake came along 2 years later, and something shifted even more dramatically. Sarah quit her part-time job entirely, claiming she needed to focus on the children. David picked up extra hours at his engineering firm, working late most nights and weekends. Their expenses skyrocketed. Private preschool, organic everything, a larger car, a bigger house. That's when David came to me with the request that changed everything. "Mom, we're looking at this house. It's perfect for the kids, great neighborhood, excellent schools, but we're just short on the down payment." He'd shown me pictures on his phone, a beautiful colonial with a big backyard, exactly the kind of place I dreamed of giving him when he was young. "How short?" I'd asked, though I already knew where this was heading. "$60,000. I know it's a lot, Mom, but it's an investment. Property values in that area only go up, and there's plenty of room. You could move in with us if you ever wanted to. The kids would love having Grandma around." $60,000. My entire life savings built up over 30 years of working as a night shift janitor, weekend house cleaner, and part-time grocery store clerk after David graduated college. Money I'd been saving for my own retirement, for the small house by the lake I'd always dreamed of. But he was my son, my only child, and he was offering me something I'd wanted even more than a house by the lake, a chance to be part of my grandchildren's daily lives. "I'll need to think about it," I'd said, though we both knew I'd already decided. 2 weeks later, I signed over my entire savings account to help with their down payment. David hugged me so tight that day, tears in his eyes. "I'll pay you back, Mom. Every penny, and you'll always have a home with us." Always have a home. The words echoed in my mind as I sat in the laundry room, listening to Sarah's voice drift down from the kitchen as she continued planning her dinner party. "Rosa will handle all the prep work. She's actually a pretty good cook when she follows directions. And don't worry about cleanup. She'll take care of everything." I closed my eyes and let myself remember the day I'd moved in. It was supposed to be temporary, just until I could find a nice apartment near their new house, just until I could save up another down payment. Sarah had shown me to the guest room upstairs, a pretty space with yellow walls and a view of the backyard. "This can be your room for now," she'd said. "The kids love having you here." For 3 months, it was wonderful. I'd wake up to Emma's giggles, help Jake with his breakfast, walk them to the school bus. David would come home to fresh meals and a clean house, and Sarah seemed genuinely grateful for the help. But things changed. when Sarah's friend Lisa moved away, leaving her without her regular babysitter. Suddenly, I wasn't just helping, I was needed. Every grocery run, every yoga class, every girls' night out required my availability. I didn't mind at first. This was family. This was what grandmothers did. Then Sarah announced she was redecorating the guest room as a home office. "We need the space, Rosa. You understand, right? The laundry room has a fold-out couch, and it's actually quite cozy. Plus, you'll be closer to the kitchen if the kids need anything at night." The laundry room, where I'd been sleeping for 6 months now, surrounded by the smell of detergent and the constant noise of appliances, where I kept my few belongings in plastic bins because there wasn't a dresser, where I had no privacy, no space to call my own, no dignity. I heard the front door slam as David left for work. A few minutes later, Emma and Jake's voices filled the house as they got ready for school. My grandchildren, the light of my life, the reason I'd convinced myself this arrangement was worth it. "Grandma Rosa," Emma's voice called from upstairs, "can you help me find my library book?" I pushed myself up from the bed, straightened my robe, and climbed the stairs again. Emma stood in the hallway, her blonde hair a mess, holding her backpack upside down. "It's not in here, and Mom says I can't go to school without it." I knelt down beside her, helping sort through her scattered papers and toys. "When did you last see it, sweetheart?" "Yesterday after dinner. I was reading it on the couch." Her blue eyes, so much like David's, looked worried. "Mom says if I lose another book, I can't get any more from the library." We found the book wedged between the couch cushions, and Emma threw her arms around my neck. "Thanks, Grandma Rosa. You always find everything. If only I could find my way out of this situation as easily as I found lost library books." Jake appeared in the kitchen as I was packing their lunches, his dark hair sticking up in all directions. At 6 years old, he was more serious than his sister, more likely to notice when adults were upset. "Grandma, why do you sleep in the laundry room?" he asked, climbing onto a kitchen stool. My heart clenched. "It's just temporary, sweetheart. Sometimes grown-ups have to make special arrangements. But Lisa's grandma has her own house, and Tommy's grandma has a big bedroom with a TV. Sarah appeared in the doorway, already applying lipstick. "Jake, eat your cereal. The bus comes in 10 minutes. She glanced at me. "Rosa, I need you to pick up groceries today. I made a list, and the house needs to be spotless by 6. We're having 8 people for dinner." 8 people. I thought about my aching back, my swollen feet, the fact that I'd been up until midnight the night before doing laundry and dishes. "Sarah, I need to talk to you about—" "Not now. I'm late for my trainer." She grabbed her designer purse and headed for the door. "Oh, and use the good china tonight. I want everything perfect." The door slammed behind her, leaving me alone with the children. Emma and Jake finished their breakfast in comfortable silence, both of them used to the tension that seemed to fill the house whenever Sarah was around. After they left for school, I stood in the quiet kitchen, looking at Sarah's list. 23 items, including things like organic heirloom tomatoes and artisanal bread. The kind of expensive groceries I could never afford for myself, bought with money that partially came from my life savings. I thought about the woman I used to be. Rosa Martinez, who worked 2 jobs and still managed to keep a spotless apartment, who cooked elaborate Sunday dinners for David and his friends, who volunteered at the church food bank and never missed a parent-teacher conference, who had dreams, plans, dignity. That woman wouldn't recognize the person I'd become. That woman would be horrified to see me living in a laundry room, being spoken to like hired help by someone young enough to be her daughter. But that woman also wouldn't understand how love could make you accept the unacceptable, how the fear of losing your only child could make you swallow your pride day after day, how the joy of tucking your grandchildren into bed could make you forget for a moment that you were slowly disappearing. I picked up Sarah's list and my purse. The grocery store was a 40-minute bus ride away. Sarah had taken the car, of course. As I walked to the bus stop, I caught a glimpse of myself in a shop window. gray-haired, tired-looking, wearing clothes that had seen better days. When had I started looking so old? When had I started looking so defeated? The bus was crowded with morning commuters, people heading to jobs where they were valued, where they received paychecks and respect. I found an empty seat and stared out the window, watching the city pass by. Somewhere out there was the apartment I used to call home, the life I used to live, the woman I used to be. At the grocery store, I carefully selected each item from Sarah's list, calculating prices in my head. The total came to over $200, more than I used to spend on groceries in a month for myself. I paid with the credit card David had given me for household expenses and tried not to think about how long it would take him to pay off this debt on top of everything else. The bus ride home gave me time to think, something I'd been avoiding for months. How had I gotten here? How had I gone from being David's beloved mother to Sarah's unpaid housekeeper? And more importantly, how much longer could I continue like this? My knees protested as I carried the heavy grocery bags up the front steps. The house felt different in the afternoon light, bigger, emptier, like a beautiful shell with no soul inside. I spent the next 3 hours preparing for Sarah's dinner party, cooking elaborate appetizers I'd never be invited to eat, polishing china I'd never be allowed to use, cleaning rooms I'd never be welcome to enjoy as a guest. By 5:30, I was exhausted. My back ached, my feet were swollen, and I had barely enough energy to shower and change into the one decent dress I owned, appropriate for serving, not for joining the party. Sarah returned home in a whirlwind of energy and expensive perfume. She walked through the house like a general inspecting troops, running her finger along surfaces, adjusting flower arrangements, critiquing my work. "The appetizers look good," she said, which was the closest thing to a compliment I'd received in months. "Make sure you stay in the kitchen during dinner. I don't want the guests feeling awkward." Staying in the kitchen, like the hired help I'd apparently become. David came home just as the first guests arrived. He barely glanced at me as he rushed upstairs to change, leaving me to answer the door and take coats. For the next 4 hours, I served food, refilled drinks, and cleaned up spills, while laughter and conversation flowed around me. I was invisible, a ghost in my own son's house. At one point, I overheard Sarah talking to her friend Jessica in the living room. I was collecting empty plates from the coffee table when Jessica asked, "So who's the woman helping tonight? She seems nice." Sarah lowered her voice, but not enough. "Oh, that's just David's mom. She lives here rent-free in exchange for chores. It works out well for everyone. She has a place to stay, and we get help with the house and kids." Jessica nodded knowingly. "Smart arrangement. My sister did something similar with her mother-in-law. These older women need to feel useful, you know?" I stood there holding their dirty plates, listening to them discuss me like I was a pet they'd decided to keep. My hands shook slightly as I carried the dishes to the kitchen, my heart pounding with a mixture of humiliation and rage I hadn't felt in years. Useful. That's what I was to them. A useful old woman who needed to feel needed. The last guest left at nearly midnight. David and Sarah went straight to bed, leaving me to finish cleaning up. I washed dishes until my hands were raw, wiped down counters until they gleamed, and put away the expensive china I'd never be invited to eat from. Finally, I made my way back to the laundry room. As I changed into my nightgown, I caught sight of myself in the small mirror hanging on the back of the door. The woman looking back at me was a stranger, tired, hollow-eyed, defeated. But something else flickered in those eyes, something I hadn't seen in months. Anger. Not the explosive kind that burns hot and fast, but the cold, steady kind that builds slowly and never goes away. The kind that whispers quietly in the dark, asking dangerous questions. How much of yourself are you willing to lose for people who don't value what you give? How many times will you accept being treated as less than human by people who should love you? When did helping your family become sacrificing your soul? I lay down on the thin mattress, listening to the washing machine's familiar hum. Tomorrow, Sarah would have another list. Tomorrow, David would barely acknowledge my existence. Tomorrow, I would wake up in a laundry room and pretend this was normal, acceptable, temporary. But tonight, for the first time in months, I allowed myself to think about what tomorrow could look like if I chose differently. If I remembered that I was Rosa Martinez, a woman who had survived being widowed at 32, who had raised a son alone, who had worked and saved and built a life through sheer determination. That woman was still in here somewhere, buried under months of humiliation and silence. That woman deserved better than a bed in a laundry room and conversation about being useful. That woman deserved to remember what it felt like to be treated like a human being. As I drifted off to sleep, I made a decision that would change everything. Tomorrow, I would start looking for that woman again. Tomorrow, I would remember that love shouldn't require you to disappear. Tomorrow, I would start planning my escape. The next 3 months became a blur of endless chores, sleepless nights, and quiet humiliation. Sarah's demands grew more unreasonable with each passing week, as if she was testing just how far she could push me before I'd finally break. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning in March, when the world seemed determined to remind me just how invisible I'd become. I woke up at 5 a.m. to the sound of Emma crying. She'd had another nightmare about monsters under her bed, and I spent 20 minutes sitting with her, stroking her hair until she fell back asleep. By the time I made it to the kitchen, my back was already aching from the awkward position I'd slept in on that terrible fold-out couch. Sarah appeared in the doorway like a storm cloud, her face twisted with irritation. "Rosa, Emma's lunch isn't packed, Jake's uniform isn't laid out, and I can smell burnt coffee from upstairs. What exactly have you been doing?" I looked at the clock. 5:47 a.m. I was comforting Emma. She had a bad dream, and that's not your job. Your job is to keep this house running smoothly. Sarah's voice cut through me like glass. I shouldn't have to tell you what needs to be done every single morning. My hands trembled as I reached for Jake's school clothes. I'll get everything ready now. See that you do. And Rosa? She paused in the doorway, not bothering to look at me. I'm having my book club over this afternoon. 12 women. I need you to prepare lunch, serve it properly, and then make yourself scarce. We don't need you hovering around while we're trying to have an intelligent conversation. Make myself scarce. Like I was some embarrassing relative who couldn't be trusted around civilized company. The morning continued its downward spiral. Jake spilled orange juice all over his freshly ironed uniform, requiring me to wash and dry it in record time. Emma couldn't find her favorite headband and refused to go to school without it. David rushed through breakfast without saying a word to anyone, his phone glued to his ear as he dealt with some work crisis. After everyone left, I stood in the quiet kitchen and tried to calculate how much time I had. 12 women for lunch meant I needed to prepare something impressive. Sarah's book club friends were all wealthy, judgmental women who would absolutely notice if the food wasn't perfect. I had 6 hours to shop, cook, clean, and somehow transform myself into the kind of invisible servant who could blend into the background. The grocery list Sarah had left was twice as long as usual. Imported cheeses, organic vegetables, artisanal bread, fresh flowers for the table. I counted the money in my purse, the small amount David gave me each week for personal expenses, and realized it wouldn't even cover the taxi fare to the expensive market Sarah preferred. The bus ride took over an hour, and by the time I returned home with my arms full of heavy bags, I had less than 4 hours to prepare everything. My feet were already swollen, my back was screaming in protest, but I forced myself to keep moving. I spent the next 3 hours in a frantic dance around the kitchen. Homemade quiche, fresh salad with pomegranate seeds and goat cheese, delicate finger sandwiches cut into perfect triangles, and individual chocolate tarts that took an hour to prepare. My hands were covered in small cuts from rushing with the knife. My clothes were stained with flour and sauce, but everything looked magazine perfect. At exactly noon, the doorbell began ringing. Sarah swept down the stairs in a flowing dress that cost more than I used to make in a month. Her hair professionally styled, her makeup flawless. She surveyed the dining room I'd spent an hour arranging and nodded once, the closest thing to approval I'd received in weeks. "The food looks acceptable," she said, adjusting a flower in the centerpiece. "Remember, serve quietly and then disappear. These women don't need to be bothered by unnecessary chatter." For the next 2 hours, I played the role of invisible servant. I served course after course while Sarah's friends discussed books they'd probably never read, vacations to places I'd never see, and charity events that cost more to attend than most people made in a year. They spoke around me, through me, sometimes even about me as if I couldn't hear every word. "Sarah, this quiche is divine," said a blonde woman wearing diamond earrings. "Did you make it yourself?" Sarah laughed, a tinkling sound that made my teeth ache. "Oh, heavens no. I'm far too busy with the children and my volunteer work. Rosa handles all the cooking." "Rosa?" The woman looked confused. "David's mother. She lives with us and helps with household things. It's quite convenient, actually." Household things. That's what my life had been reduced to. Household things. "How wonderful that she's still useful at her age," another woman commented. "My mother-in-law just sits around complaining about her arthritis. At least yours earns her keep." Earns her keep. I was standing 3 feet away refilling their water glasses, and they were discussing whether I earned the right to exist in this house. I retreated to the kitchen, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the serving tray. Through the doorway, I could hear their conversation continue. "I think it's so generous of you to take her in, Sarah. Not everyone would be willing to share their space with an older relative." "Well, it works out for everyone. She gets a place to live, and we get help with the house. Plus, the children benefit from having their grandmother around, even if she's not the most sophisticated influence." Not the most sophisticated influence. I thought about the nights I'd spent helping Emma with homework, reading bedtime stories to Jake, teaching them Spanish songs I'd learned from my own grandmother. I thought about the way they ran to me when they were hurt, the way they trusted me with their secrets, the way their faces lit up when I walked into a room. But none of that mattered to Sarah. To her, I was just an old woman who wasn't sophisticated enough to be a proper influence on her children. I finished cleaning the kitchen while their laughter drifted in from the dining room. My back was on fire, my feet felt like they might give out completely, but I forced myself to keep moving. The alternative, sitting down, admitting defeat, felt more dangerous than the physical pain. By the time the last guest left, I was ready to collapse. Sarah swept through the house, inspecting my work like a drill sergeant. "The silver needs more polishing," she announced, "and there are water spots on the good glasses. I'll need you to redo those before David gets home." I stared at her. This woman who was young enough to be my daughter, who had never worked a real job in her life, who was criticizing work I'd been doing since before she was born. Something inside me finally cracked. "Sarah," I said quietly, "I need to sit down for a few minutes. My back." "Your back?" She looked at me with genuine surprise, as if the idea that I might experience physical pain had never occurred to her. "Rosa, I have a dinner party tomorrow night. 8 couples. I need this house to be absolutely perfect." The room started spinning. I reached for the counter to steady myself, but my vision was getting blurry around the edges. The last thing I remembered was Sarah's voice, sharp with annoyance rather than concern. "Rosa, what are you—" I woke up on the kitchen floor with David kneeling beside me, his face pale with worry. "Mom, can you hear me? I'm calling an ambulance." "No," I whispered, struggling to sit up. "No ambulance. I can't afford—" "Don't worry about money, Mom. Just stay still." His hand was gentle on my shoulder, and for a moment, I saw a glimpse of the caring son I'd raised. Sarah stood in the doorway, her arms crossed, her expression more irritated than concerned. "Is she okay? Because I really need to know if she'll be able to handle tomorrow's dinner party." David's head snapped up, his eyes flashing with something I hadn't seen in years. "Sarah, my mother just collapsed. The dinner party is not the priority right now." "Well, I can't exactly cancel at the last minute. Do you have any idea how much I've already spent on groceries?" I watched my son's face change as he processed what his wife had just said. For a brief moment, I thought he might finally see what I'd been enduring, might finally understand what his silence had cost us both. But the moment passed. David helped me to my feet, his movements careful but his eyes already distant. "Let's get you checked out, Mom. Sarah, can you handle the kids when they get home from school?" Sarah's sigh was audible. "I suppose I'll have to." The emergency room was a blur of tests and waiting. My blood pressure was dangerously high, my body was severely dehydrated, and the doctor used words like exhaustion and stress-related collapse. David sat beside me during the longest waits, occasionally patting my hand, but I could see his mind was elsewhere. "The doctor says you need complete rest for at least a week," he told me as we waited for the discharge papers. "No housework, no cooking, no lifting anything heavy." I nodded, though we both knew complete rest was impossible in a house where I was the primary caretaker for everything and everyone. "Maybe I should look into getting some help," David continued, though his tone suggested he was thinking out loud rather than making a real commitment. "A cleaning service or maybe a part-time nanny." "That would be expensive," I said quietly. "Yeah." He rubbed his forehead, a gesture I remembered from his childhood when he was worried about something. "Money's pretty tight right now. The mortgage, the kids' school fees, Sarah's medical bills from her spa treatments. Her therapy sessions." I almost laughed at his slip. Sarah's therapy sessions at the luxury spa downtown billed to their insurance as mental health treatment, but I didn't have the energy to call him on it. The ride home was silent. David helped me down to the laundry room, his face carefully blank as he took in my living conditions, the fold-out couch, the plastic bins holding my belongings, the complete lack of privacy or dignity. "Mom," he started, then stopped. Are you comfortable down here?" It was the first time in months he'd really looked at where I was living. I wanted to tell him the truth, that I was miserable, that his wife treated me like hired help, that I was disappearing a little more each day. Instead, I did what I'd been doing for months. I lied. "It's fine, David. I'm fine." He lingered in the doorway for a moment, and I thought he might say something else. But then Sarah's voice called from upstairs, sharp with impatience. "David, the kids need help with their homework, and I still have to figure out tomorrow's menu since Rosa obviously can't handle it." He squeezed my shoulder once and left me alone in the laundry room. I lay on the thin mattress, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of family life happening above my head, life that I was part of but not included in, life that I supported but wasn't valued for. That night, as I lay in the dark listening to the washing machine's familiar hum, I made myself face some hard truths. My son loved me, but he loved his comfortable life more. He loved his wife, but he was too weak to stand up to her. He was grateful for my help, but he wasn't willing to protect me from his wife's cruelty. And Sarah? Sarah saw me as exactly what she'd always seen me as, a convenient solution to her domestic problems, an old woman who should be grateful for a roof over her head regardless of the price she paid for it. The doctor had said I needed rest, but how could I rest when Sarah had a dinner party the next night? How could I rest when the children needed their lunches packed, their clothes laid out, their grandmother's attention when they had nightmares? I closed my eyes and tried to remember the last time someone had taken care of me, the last time someone had asked what I needed, what I wanted, how I was feeling. I couldn't remember. Somewhere along the way, I'd become the person who gave everything and asked for nothing, who absorbed everyone else's needs and forgot she had any of her own. The next morning, despite the doctor's orders, I dragged myself upstairs to begin preparations for Sarah's dinner party. My body protested every movement, but the alternative, Facing Sarah's anger if the evening wasn't perfect seemed worse than the physical pain. Sarah found me in the kitchen at 7 a.m., moving slowly as I tried to organize the day's tasks. "Rosa, you look terrible," she said, though her tone suggested this was more of an inconvenience than a concern. "Are you going to be able to handle tonight?" I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell her that her dinner party wasn't worth my health, that her social status wasn't worth my dignity, that her comfort wasn't worth my pain. Instead, I heard myself saying the words that had become my default response to everything. "I'll manage." Good, because I've already told everyone about the menu, and I can't afford to look foolish. She poured herself coffee from the pot I'd made, not offering me any. "Oh, and Rosa? Try to look more presentable tonight. Maybe do something with your hair." Do something with my hair. I touched my gray roots self-consciously, thinking about the salon appointments I used to keep, the woman I used to be who took pride in her appearance. When had I stopped caring how I looked? When had I accepted that my role was to be invisible, unnoticed, unremarkable? The day passed in a haze of cooking and cleaning. My hands moved automatically through familiar tasks while my mind wandered to dangerous places. I thought about the apartment I used to live in, small but entirely mine. I thought about the job I'd quit to help with the grandchildren, the independence I'd given up, the life I'd traded for this existence in service to people who barely saw me as human. By evening, I was running on pure stubbornness. The dinner was perfect. Roasted lamb with rosemary, garlic potatoes, fresh vegetables, homemade bread, chocolate soufflé for dessert. The dining room looked like something from a magazine, the table set with crystal and silver that gleamed under the chandelier. Sarah's guests arrived in expensive cars, dressed in designer clothes, carrying bottles of wine that cost more than my weekly grocery budget. I served them with practiced invisibility, moving through the room like a ghost, while they discussed their children's private schools, their vacation homes, their charity work. "Sarah, this lamb is absolutely divine," gushed a woman in pearls. "You simply must give me the recipe." "Oh, it's not really my recipe," Sarah said with false modesty. "Rosa handles all the cooking. She's been doing it for decades, so she knows all the old-fashioned techniques." Old-fashioned techniques, like I was some quaint relic from a bygone era, useful for my knowledge of antiquated skills but not worthy of credit or recognition. "How fortunate for you," the woman replied. "Good help is so hard to find these days." Good help. There it was again. The reduction of my entire existence to my usefulness as unpaid labor. I retreated to the kitchen, my chest tight with a familiar mixture of humiliation and rage. Through the serving window, I could see David laughing at something one of the guests had said, his arm around Sarah's waist, playing the perfect host in the perfect life I'd helped him build. As I stood there washing dishes, my back screaming in protest, my feet swollen and aching, I realized something that should have been obvious months ago. This wasn't temporary. This wasn't going to get better. This was my life now, and it would continue to be my life until the day I died or found the courage to change it. The question was, did I have any courage left? I thought I knew the answer, but sometimes life has a way of surprising you. Sometimes the universe sends you exactly what you need at exactly the moment you need it most, even when you've stopped believing in miracles. But I had no idea that my miracle was sitting in a lawyer's office 3 states away, waiting to change everything. Tell me in the comments, have you ever felt completely invisible in your own family? Sometimes the people closest to us forget we're human too. The letter arrived on a Thursday morning in April, 3 weeks after my collapse. I was in the kitchen at 6 a.m. preparing Emma's special lunch for her field trip when I heard the mail slot clatter. Sarah had left a note the night before reminding me that Emma needed a Pinterest-worthy lunch because the other mothers would be volunteering, and she didn't want to look bad by comparison. I was cutting sandwiches into perfect heart shapes when David appeared in the kitchen, already dressed for work, shuffling through the mail with one hand while texting with the other. Bills, bills, more bills, he muttered, tossing envelopes onto the counter. Some catalog for Sarah, something for the previous owner. He paused, holding up a cream-colored envelope. Mom, this one's for you. My hand stilled on the sandwich cutter. Mail for me? I hadn't received personal mail since moving in 8 months ago. Everything went through David and Sarah now. My Social Security checks were direct deposited into an account David managed to help with household expenses, and I'd lost touch with most of my friends during the chaos of selling my apartment and moving. The envelope was thick, expensive-looking paper with my name written in elegant script. Mrs. Rosa Martinez. In the corner was the return address of Williamson, Hayes and Associates, attorneys at law, from a city I'd never heard of. Probably some scam, David said, already losing interest as his phone buzzed with another work message. You know how these lawyers try to trick elderly people. But something about the letter felt different. The weight of it, the formal presentation, the way my full name was written with such careful precision. I tucked it into my robe pocket, planning to read it later when I had privacy, a rare commodity in this house. The morning proceeded with its usual chaos. Emma couldn't find her favorite scrunchie. Jake spilled syrup on his shirt. Sarah complained that her coffee was too strong, and David left without saying goodbye. By the time everyone was gone, I was already exhausted, but the letter in my pocket felt like a small secret burning against my side. I waited until I'd finished the breakfast dishes, then carefully made my way down to the laundry room. My hands trembled slightly as I opened the envelope, though I told myself it was probably just arthritis, not anticipation. The letterhead was impressive, heavy paper, gold embossing, clearly from a legitimate law firm. My eyes scanned the formal language, trying to make sense of the legal terminology. Dear Mrs. Martinez, it began, we regret to inform you of the passing of your aunt, Elena Vasquez, on March 15th. Ms. Vasquez has named you as the sole beneficiary of her estate. I had to read the sentence 3 times before it sank in. Aunt Elena was dead. My father's younger sister, the woman I hadn't spoken to in over 15 years, after a bitter family argument I could barely remember the details of now. Elena, who had never married, never had children, who had built a successful career as a seamstress and lived quietly in a small town I'd never visited. But it was the next paragraph that made me sit down hard on my makeshift bed. The estate consists of a 3-bedroom cottage at 42 Maple Lane, appraised at $180,000, and investment bonds with a current value of $220,000. Please contact our office at your earliest convenience to discuss the transfer of assets. $400,000. A house and $400,000. I read the letter again, certain I was misunderstanding something, but the numbers didn't change. Elena Vasquez, my estranged aunt, who I'd assumed had forgotten I existed, had left me everything she owned. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the paper. For 8 months, I'd been living in a laundry room, working as an unpaid servant, accepting scraps of dignity from people who should have loved me. And all this time, there had been a way out, a door I never knew existed. I thought about Elena, trying to remember the last time I'd seen her. It was at my father's funeral, 17 years ago. She'd been in her 60s then, still beautiful in that sharp-edged way she'd always had, wearing an expensive black suit and pearls. We'd argued about something, I couldn't even remember what, and I'd left the funeral reception angry and hurt. Pride had kept me from reaching out afterward, and apparently it had kept her from reaching out to me. But she'd remembered me in the end. Despite our years of silence, despite whatever petty disagreement had driven us apart, she'd thought of me when it mattered most. I sat in that laundry room for nearly an hour, reading and rereading the letter, trying to process what this meant. Financial independence, a house of my own, the ability to leave this place and never look back. But leaving would mean abandoning Emma and Jake. It would mean admitting that my son cared more about his comfortable life than his mother's dignity. It would mean accepting that the family I'd sacrificed everything for didn't actually want me. They just wanted what I could provide. The sound of Sarah's car in the driveway snapped me back to reality. I quickly folded the letter and hid it under my pillow, then climbed the stairs to begin my afternoon chores. But everything felt different now. Every task Sarah assigned, every dismissive comment, every moment of being treated like hired help, it all felt temporary now, like a play I was performing but could walk away from at any time. "Rosa, I need you to start dinner early tonight," Sarah announced, sweeping into the kitchen with her yoga mat and designer water bottle. "David's bringing his boss home, and I want to make a good impression. Something impressive, but not too fancy. You know what I mean?" I nodded, but my mind was elsewhere. In a small town 3 states away, there was a cottage with my name on the deed. There were investment accounts that would let me live comfortably for the rest of my life. There was a future that didn't involve sleeping next to a washing machine or being spoken to like I was barely human. "Are you listening to me?" Sarah's sharp voice cut through my thoughts. I said, "I want the house spotless before David gets home. And please, try to stay out of sight during dinner. Mr. Peterson doesn't need to be bothered by unnecessary introductions." Unnecessary introductions. As if my very existence was an embarrassment that needed to be hidden from David's professional contacts. "Of course," I heard myself say, though the words felt strange in my mouth. For the first time in months, I was agreeing to Sarah's demands while knowing I didn't have to. The power dynamic had shifted in a way she couldn't possibly understand. I spent the afternoon cooking and cleaning with a lightness I hadn't felt in years. David's boss was impressed with the dinner I prepared, complimented the wine selection I'd researched, and praised the elegant table setting I'd arranged. Through it all, I remained invisible in the kitchen, listening to David accept credit for efforts he'd had nothing to do with. "Your wife certainly knows how to entertain," Mr. Peterson said over dessert. "This meal is restaurant quality." "Sarah's very talented," David replied smoothly. "She has a real gift for hospitality." I stood in the kitchen doorway, holding the coffee service, watching my son lie without hesitation. Not a word about the woman who'd spent 6 hours preparing everything from scratch, who'd researched the perfect wine pairings, who'd polished every piece of silver until it gleamed. But for the first time, the injustice felt manageable, temporary. Soon, I would be the one sitting at a dinner table while someone else served the coffee. Soon, I would be the one making decisions about my own life instead of living at the mercy of other people's whims. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I called the number on the lawyer's letterhead. A recorded message told me the office was closed, but I could leave a voicemail. My voice sounded stronger than it had in months. "This is Rosa Martinez. I received your letter about Elena Vasquez's estate. I'd like to schedule an appointment to discuss the inheritance. Please call me back at—" I paused, realizing I didn't have a phone number that was truly mine. Everything went through David and Sarah's landline or their cell phones. "I'll call you back tomorrow during business hours." The next morning, I waited until Sarah left for her Pilates class before using the kitchen phone to call the law office again. The receptionist was professional and kind, scheduling an appointment for the following week. She explained that I would need to come to their office in person to sign papers and discuss the details of the inheritance. "It's quite a substantial estate," she said gently. "Ms. Vasquez was very specific in her will about wanting you to be financially secure. She left detailed instructions about the property and investments." After I hung up, I stood in the quiet kitchen, looking around at the life I'd been living. The expensive appliances I wasn't allowed to use for my own meals. The beautiful dining room where I'd never been invited to sit as a guest. The family photos that included everyone except me, as if I was too unimportant to be worth documenting. For 8 months, I'd convinced myself this was temporary, that if I just worked harder, complained less, made myself more useful, eventually I'd earn a place at the table instead of serving from the shadows. But that was never going to happen. I wasn't a family member here. I was free labor with an emotional attachment that kept me from demanding fair treatment. The realization should have been devastating, but instead it felt liberating. For the first time since moving in, I saw the situation clearly. without the fog of desperation and denial that had clouded my judgment. I spent the next week going through the motions of my usual routine while secretly planning my escape. I researched the town where Elena's cottage was located, a small coastal community with a library, a farmer's market, and what looked like a peaceful, quiet way of life. I looked up the local bus schedules, calculated travel time, imagined what it would feel like to wake up in a place where no one expected me to earn my right to exist. The hardest part was acting normal around Emma and Jake. They were the innocent victims in all of this. Children who loved their grandmother and had no understanding of the toxic dynamics their parents had created. How could I explain to a 6-year-old and an 8-year-old that their mother treated me like a servant? How could I make them understand that leaving wasn't about abandoning them, but about saving myself? The Tuesday morning of my appointment with the lawyer, I told Sarah I had a doctor's appointment in the city. "How long will you be gone?" she asked, her tone suggesting this was a major inconvenience. "I have tennis lessons at 2 and the kids get home at 3:30. "I should be back by then," I lied smoothly. The appointment was scheduled for 10 a.m., but I had no idea how long it would take to handle the paperwork, and honestly, I was looking forward to spending a few hours in a place where no one knew I was supposed to be grateful for scraps. The bus ride to the city gave me time to think about what I wanted to say to the lawyer. Elena had left me a way out, but was I brave enough to take it? Was I strong enough to start over at 64, to build a life that was entirely my own? The law office was in an old building downtown, the kind of place that spoke of dignity and tradition. The receptionist offered me coffee and treated me like a valued client, not an inconvenience to be managed. When Mr. Williamson came out to greet me, he shook my hand warmly and looked me directly in the eyes. "Mrs. Martinez, I'm so sorry for your loss. Your aunt spoke of you often in her final years." "She did?" I was surprised. I hadn't realized Elena had even thought about me after our estrangement. "Oh yes, she regretted the argument that came between you, but she was too proud to reach out. She used to say you were the strongest woman in the family, that you'd raised your son alone after your husband's death and never asked anyone for help." Tears pricked my eyes. Elena had been watching from a distance all these years, remembering the woman I used to be, the strong, independent Rosa who had faced tragedy and hardship without losing her dignity. The meeting took 2 hours. Elena's cottage was even more beautiful than the pictures suggested. A white clapboard house with blue shutters, a wraparound porch, and a garden that had been lovingly maintained. The investment bonds were conservative but solid, designed to provide steady income for decades. Elena had even left detailed notes about local services, recommended contractors, and the names of neighbors who had become friends over the years. "She was very thorough," Mr. Williamson explained, handing me a thick folder of documents. "She wanted to make sure you'd have everything you needed to start fresh, if that's what you chose to do, start fresh." The phrase echoed in my mind as I signed paper after paper, officially becoming the owner of a house I'd never seen and financial accounts that would change my life forever. On the bus ride home, I stared out the window at the passing landscape and tried to imagine telling David and Sarah about the inheritance. Would David be happy for me? Would he finally see this as an opportunity to treat me with respect, knowing I no longer needed his charity? Or would he be angry that I'd kept the inheritance secret, angry that I now had options that didn't include serving his family's every need? And Sarah would definitely be angry. She'd lose her free housekeeper, her unpaid nanny, her convenient solution to all domestic inconveniences. She'd have to start paying for the services I'd been providing for free, start treating her children like her responsibility instead of mine. But as the bus pulled into familiar neighborhoods, as I got closer to the house where I slept in a laundry room and lived on the edges of other people's lives, I realized I didn't care about their reactions anymore. For 8 months, I'd shaped my entire existence around avoiding their displeasure, trying to be useful enough to earn basic human dignity. But dignity isn't something you earn. It's something you claim. I arrived home to find Sarah pacing in the kitchen, her face flushed with anger. "Where have you been?" she demanded. "It's almost 4 o'clock. The kids have been home for 30 minutes and I had to cancel my tennis lesson to wait for you." I looked at her, really looked at her, for what felt like the first time in months. Sarah Peterson, a 30-year-old woman who had never worked a full-time job, never paid her own rent, never faced real hardship or responsibility. A woman who thought having to watch her own children for 30 minutes was a crisis worth getting angry about. "I'm sorry," I said, though I wasn't. "The appointment took longer than expected." "Well, it's incredibly inconsiderate. I have commitments too, you know. I can't just drop everything because you can't manage your time properly." Her words washed over me like water off glass. 8 months ago, this confrontation would have left me anxious and apologetic, scrambling to make up for my perceived failures. But now, with Elena's letter burning in my purse and the deed to a cottage in my future, Sarah's anger felt as meaningless as a toddler's tantrum. "It won't happen again," I said quietly, and for the first time, I meant it. It wouldn't happen again because soon I wouldn't be here to disappoint her. That night, as I lay in the laundry room listening to the familiar sounds of the house settling around me, I made my final decision. I would give David one chance to see what he was choosing, one opportunity to remember that I was his mother before I was his wife's employee. If he chose his comfortable life over basic decency, then I would know exactly where I stood, and then I would walk away. The plan forming in my mind was simple but powerful. I would tell them about the inheritance, watch their reactions, and finally understand once and for all whether there was any real love left in this family worth fighting for. I had a feeling I already knew the answer, but sometimes you have to see the truth written clearly before you can accept it and move on. What would you do if you suddenly inherited enough money to change your life completely? Sometimes the biggest prison is thinking you don't have any choices. I chose a Sunday evening for the conversation that would change everything. David was relaxed, sprawled on the couch watching football, while Sarah scrolled through her phone, planning next week's social calendar. The kids were upstairs getting ready for bed, and the house had that peaceful quality it only achieved when everyone was temporarily satisfied with their lives. I'd been planning this moment for 3 days, rehearsing different versions of the conversation in my head, while I went through my usual routine of cooking, cleaning, and being invisible. But now that the time had come, my heart was pounding so hard I was sure they could hear it. "David, Sarah," I said, standing in the doorway between the kitchen and living room. "I need to talk to you both about something important." David barely looked up from the television. "Can it wait until halftime, Mom?" "This is a crucial play." "No," I said, my voice stronger than I'd intended. "It can't wait." Something in my tone finally got their attention. David muted the TV while Sarah looked up from her phone, her expression already showing the irritation that had become her default reaction to anything I said. "What's wrong?" David asked, and I could hear the worry in his voice. He probably thought I was about to announce some medical crisis that would complicate their lives even further. I pulled Elena's letter from my pocket, the paper soft from being folded and unfolded so many times over the past week. "I received this last Thursday. It's from a lawyer." Sarah's eyebrows rose. "A lawyer? Rosa, please tell me you haven't gotten yourself into some kind of legal trouble." The casual assumption that anything involving a lawyer must be my fault, my failure, my problem to solve. It was so perfectly Sarah that I almost laughed. Instead, I unfolded the letter with deliberate care. "My Aunt Elena died last month. She left me everything in her will." The silence that followed was deafening. David's face went through several expressions: confusion, surprise, and then something that looked like calculation. Sarah's mouth opened and closed like a fish, clearly trying to process this unexpected development. "Everything?" David finally asked. What exactly does that mean? I looked down at the letter, though I'd memorized every word by now. A house worth $180,000 and investment bonds worth $220,000. $400,000, Sarah breathed, and suddenly she was sitting up straight, her phone forgotten. Rosa, are you serious? You inherited $400,000? Yes. The word came out steady and calm, though my hands were shaking slightly. The lawyer says I can take possession of the house whenever I'm ready. David was staring at me like I'd suddenly grown a second head. Mom, this is incredible news. Why didn't you tell us sooner? It was such a typical David question, not how are you feeling about losing your aunt or are you okay with this sudden change? Just mild reproach that I hadn't shared information that might affect him. I wanted to make sure it was real first, I said carefully, and I wanted to think about what it means. What it means? Sarah's voice had taken on that sharp edge I knew so well. It means you're rich, Rosa. It means you don't have to worry about money anymore. She said it like it was a good thing, but something in her tone suggested she was already calculating how this windfall might impact her own life. I could practically see the wheels turning in her head. Actually, I said, taking a deep breath, it means I have choices now. For the first time in almost a year, I have real choices about where I live and how I spend my time. The room went very quiet. David's expression shifted from surprised happiness to something more guarded, as if he was finally beginning to understand that this conversation wasn't just about sharing good news. What kind of choices? He asked slowly. This was it. The moment I'd been preparing for, the conversation that would reveal everything about who these people really were and how they really saw me. I could move to Elena's cottage, I said simply. It's in a small town near the coast, 3 bedrooms, a garden, peaceful neighbors. I could live there independently with my own space and my own dignity. Move out? Sarah's voice was sharp now, all pretense of happiness for my good fortune evaporating. But Rosa, you can't just leave. We need you here. We need you here. Not we love having you here or we'd miss you terribly. We need you here. Like I was a piece of essential equipment rather than a family member. Need me for what? I asked quietly. Sarah's mouth opened and closed several times as she tried to find a way to say, we need you to be our unpaid servant, that didn't sound completely heartless. For the children, she finally said. Emma and Jake adore you. You can't just abandon them. I wouldn't be abandoning them. I'd be living my own life. They could visit, stay for weekends, spend school holidays with me. But I'd be their grandmother, not their full-time caretaker. David was looking back and forth between us like he was watching a tennis match, clearly uncomfortable with the direction this conversation was taking. Mom, he said carefully, I think we should talk about this more before you make any big decisions. $400,000 is a lot of money, but it's not infinite. You need to think about your future, about healthcare costs as you get older, about having family nearby who can help if you need it. Help if I need it. I almost laughed at the irony. For 8 months, I'd been the one providing help. Cooking, cleaning, childcare, emotional support. But now that I had the means to be independent, suddenly David was concerned about my need for assistance. You're right that it's not infinite, I agreed. But it's enough to live comfortably for the rest of my life if I'm careful. And Elena's cottage is paid for, so I'd have very low expenses. But what about us? Sarah's voice was getting higher, more desperate. David works 60 hours a week. I have commitments with the children's schools, my volunteer work, my fitness routine. We can't just suddenly take on all the household responsibilities you've been handling. There it was, the truth, spoken out loud at last. I wasn't family to Sarah. I was household staff. The idea of losing me wasn't emotionally devastating to her. It was logistically inconvenient. You could hire help, I suggested mildly. A housekeeper, a nanny, a cook. With David's salary, you should be able to afford professional services. Professional services cost money, Rosa, David said, and now there was an edge to his voice, too. Good help is expensive. We're already stretched thin with the mortgage and the kids' expenses. The mortgage I'd helped them afford with my life savings. The kids' expenses that had doubled since I'd been providing free childcare. But pointing that out would only make me sound bitter, and I was trying very hard to give them a chance to surprise me with their response. Besides, Sarah added, leaning forward like she was making a crucial point, hired help isn't the same as family. The children need stability, consistency. They need their grandmother. They need their grandmother. The words might have meant something if Sarah had ever treated me like a beloved family member, rather than convenient free labor. If she'd ever asked my opinion on parenting decisions, rather than issuing orders about how to care for the children. If she'd ever shown gratitude for my sacrifices, rather than resentment for my presence. The children would still have their grandmother, I said firmly. I'd just be their grandmother who lives in her own house instead of their grandmother who sleeps in the laundry room. The words hung in the air like a challenge. For 8 months, none of us had acknowledged the reality of my living situation out loud. I slept in the laundry room while they enjoyed the comfort of the house I'd helped them buy, and we all pretended this was a normal family arrangement. David had the grace to look ashamed, but Sarah's expression hardened. The laundry room was always temporary, she said defensively. We've been planning to finish the basement, create a proper apartment for you down there. When? I asked. You've been saying that for 6 months, but nothing's been done. No plans drawn up, no contractors contacted, no timeline established. Face it, Sarah, you're perfectly happy with me living in the laundry room because it keeps me in my place. That's not fair, David said, but his protest lacked conviction. We've been busy with work and the kids. Home renovation projects take time. David, I said gently, you found time to remodel the guest bathroom for Sarah's mother's visit. You found time to install that expensive sound system in the living room. You found time to build that elaborate playset in the backyard. But in 8 months, you haven't found time to give your mother a proper bedroom. He opened his mouth to argue, then closed it again, because there was no argument to make. The truth was sitting there between us like an unwelcome guest that couldn't be politely ignored anymore. Look, Mom, David said finally, maybe we haven't handled everything perfectly, but this house works for all of us. You have a place to live. We have help with the kids and household management. Everyone benefits. Why change something that's working? Working for whom? I wanted to ask. Working for you and Sarah, who get free domestic services and childcare. But is it working for me? Is sleeping in a laundry room and being treated like hired help really working for anyone with basic human dignity? Instead, I asked a different question. David, do you remember the last time someone cooked dinner for me? He looked confused by the change of subject. What do you mean? I mean exactly what I said. When was the last time someone in this family prepared a meal with the intention of feeding me? When was the last time I sat down to eat without having to serve everyone else first? The silence stretched out uncomfortably. Sarah was staring at her hands, and David was looking anywhere but at me. I cook for the family every day, I continued, but I'm not part of the family meals, am I? I eat standing up in the kitchen after everyone else is finished, or I eat leftovers alone after cleaning up. When was the last time someone asked what I'd like for dinner? When was the last time someone said, Rosa, sit down and relax, we'll handle the dishes tonight? We've been busy, Sarah started, but I held up my hand. I'm not finished. When was the last time someone in this house asked about my day, about my feelings, about my dreams or hopes or fears? When was the last time someone treated me like a person rather than a service provider? The questions hung in the air like accusations, which I suppose they were, because the truth was that I'd become invisible in this house not through some gradual process, but through deliberate choices they'd made about what my value was and where I belonged. That's not how we see you, David said weakly. Isn't it? I pulled out my phone and showed them the photos I'd taken the day before. These are pictures of every family photo displayed in this house. 23 pictures of family memories, birthday parties, holidays, vacations, casual moments. How many of them include me? They both stared at the phone screen, though they already knew the answer. None, I said when neither of them responded. 23 family photos, and I don't appear in a single one. Because I'm not family in this house. I'm the help. I'm the person who takes the pictures, not the person who belongs in them. Sarah's face was flushed now, but with anger rather than shame. That's ridiculous, Rosa. You're being overly dramatic. So we haven't been perfect about including you in photos. That doesn't mean we don't value you. Doesn't it? I asked. Then tell me, Sarah. What do you value about me, specifically? She opened her mouth, then closed it, clearly struggling to come up with an answer that didn't boil down to my usefulness as unpaid labor. You're good with the children, she finally said. How am I good with them? You take care of them. You help with homework and bedtime stories. So you value me as a babysitter. That's not what I meant. What else do you value about me? Another long pause. You keep the house clean. So you value me as a housekeeper. Rosa, you're twisting my words. What else? You cook wonderful meals. So you value me as a cook. I looked at David. Your turn. What do you value about your mother besides her domestic services? David looked trapped, his eyes darting between Sarah and me, like he was hoping one of us would rescue him from having to answer. Mom, you know I love you. That's not what I asked. I asked what you value about me. Love is just a word, David. What specific things about me as a person do you appreciate? The silence was deafening, because the truth was that they didn't see me as a person anymore. Somewhere along the way, I'd become a collection of useful functions rather than a human being with thoughts, feelings, dreams, and needs of my own. This is exactly why I need to leave, I said quietly. Not because I don't love you or the children, but because I can't continue to disappear a little more each day. Elena's inheritance gives me a chance to remember who I am outside of what I can do for other people. So you're just going to abandon us? Sarah's voice was shrill now, all pretense of caring about my well-being gone. After everything we've done for you? Everything you've done for me? I couldn't keep the incredulity out of my voice. Sarah, what exactly have you done for me? We gave you a place to live when you needed one. I gave you $60,000 for the down payment on this house, then sold my own apartment to move in and help with your children. I didn't need you to give me a place to live. I had a place to live. I chose to help you because I thought we were family. We are family. No, I said sadly. Family doesn't treat each other the way you've treated me. Family doesn't expect one person to give everything while everyone else takes whatever they want. David finally found his voice. Mom, I think you're being unfair. We appreciate everything you do. Do you, David? Really? Then why haven't you said so in 8 months? Why haven't you defended me when Sarah speaks to me like hired help? Why haven't you insisted that I have a proper place to sleep in the house I helped you buy? He was struggling, and I could see the exact moment when he realized he didn't have good answers to my questions. You know what the saddest part is? I continued. I would have stayed, even sleeping in the laundry room, even being treated like a servant. I would have stayed if you'd just shown me basic human respect. If you'd included me in family decisions, asked my opinion occasionally, remembered that I exist when you're not needing something from me. We can change, David said desperately. We can do better. You don't have to leave. But Sarah was shaking her head, her expression cold and calculating. Actually, maybe she should go. If Rosa is going to be this ungrateful, this dramatic about every little thing, maybe it would be better for everyone if she found somewhere else to live. The words hit David like a physical blow. He stared at his wife in shock, clearly not expecting her to reveal her true feelings quite so baldly. Sarah. No, David. I'm tired of pretending. Your mother has never been happy here, no matter what we do. She complains about everything, acts like she's doing us some huge favor by helping with basic household tasks. Maybe it's time she learned to appreciate what she had here. What I had here. A bed in a laundry room and the privilege of working for free while being spoken to like a child. You're right, I said calmly. It is time for me to learn to appreciate what I have. And what I have is a house of my own, enough money to live independently, and the chance to spend my remaining years with people who see me as a human being rather than a domestic appliance. I stood up, feeling strangely light despite the heaviness of what was happening. I'll be leaving next Friday. That gives you a week to make other arrangements for childcare and housekeeping. Next Friday? David's voice cracked. Mom, that's too soon. We need time to figure things out, to find help. You've had 8 months to figure things out, David. You've had 8 months to treat me like family instead of hired help. You've had 8 months to remember that I'm your mother, not your employee. Sarah was on her feet now, too, her face twisted with fury. Fine, leave. See how well you do living alone at your age. See how long that money lasts when you're paying for everything yourself. Don't come crawling back here when you realize how good you had it. How good I had it. The phrase would have been laughable if it wasn't so revealing of how she truly saw my situation. I won't be coming back, I said quietly. And Sarah? I hope you find someone else to work for free, to sleep in your laundry room, to be grateful for scraps of basic human decency. I hope you find someone who's willing to disappear a little more each day so you can maintain your comfortable life. I started to walk toward the stairs, then turned back. Oh, and you should probably start interviewing housekeepers tomorrow. The going rate for someone with my experience is about $30 an hour. Full-time domestic help will probably cost you around $5,000 a month. I hope David's boss gives him that raise he's been hoping for. I left them sitting in stunned silence and went down to the laundry room to begin packing my life into the same plastic bins I'd been living out of for 8 months. As I folded my few belongings, I could hear their voices rising in argument upstairs. David panicking about the cost of replacing me, Sarah insisting that I was bluffing, that I'd never actually leave. But they were both wrong. I wasn't bluffing, and I was absolutely leaving. For the first time in 8 months, I was choosing myself. Have you ever had to choose between staying with family who didn't appreciate you or starting over completely alone? Sometimes the hardest thing is admitting that love alone isn't enough. The week that followed was the longest and strangest of my life. I moved through my final days in that house like a ghost preparing for her own funeral, packing my belongings while continuing to perform the duties that had defined my existence for 8 months. Sarah barely spoke to me, except to issue increasingly frantic instructions about maintaining the household routines in my absence. David alternated between guilt-ridden attempts at conversation and cold silence, as if he couldn't decide whether to beg me to stay or punish me for leaving. On Monday morning, I woke up in the laundry room for what I hoped would be the last time. The washing machine hummed its familiar tune, but instead of feeling trapped by the sound, I felt oddly comforted by it. This room had been my prison, but it had also been my sanctuary. The only space in the house where I could be alone with my thoughts, where I could remember who I used to be before I became everyone else's solution to their problems. I made breakfast for the family as usual, packed Emma and Jake's lunches with the same care I'd shown for months, and listened to Sarah's increasingly detailed instructions about maintaining her social calendar. The grocery order needs to be placed by Tuesday morning, she said, not looking at me as she applied her lipstick with practiced precision. Emma has that birthday party on Saturday. The gift is already wrapped and in the hall closet. Jake's soccer uniform needs to be washed with the special detergent, not the regular kind. And don't forget that David's mother is visiting next weekend. David's mother. The irony wasn't lost on me that Sarah was planning visits from her actual mother-in-law while treating the woman currently serving as her free domestic help like an inconvenience to be managed. "Sarah," I said quietly, "I won't be here for any of those things. Remember? I'm leaving Friday." She whirled around, her eyes flashing with anger. "Well, you'll just have to delay your departure. I can't handle all of this alone, and David can't take time off work right now. You'll need to stay until we find suitable help." The audacity took my breath away. Even now, even after I'd made my position clear, she expected me to rearrange my life to accommodate her convenience. "No," I said simply. "I'm leaving Friday as planned. You have 4 days to make alternative arrangements." "Rosa, be reasonable." "I am being reasonable. I'm giving you a week's notice, which is more than many employers receive when domestic help resigns." The word employers hung in the air between us like a challenge, because that's what they were, wasn't it? Employers who had never paid wages, never provided benefits, never acknowledged the economic value of my labor. Employers who expected loyalty and flexibility without offering basic respect in return. David appeared in the doorway, his hair still messy from sleep, holding his coffee mug like a lifeline. "Mom, we need to talk about this leaving thing. I've been thinking—" "There's nothing to talk about, David. My decision is final." "But what about the kids? They don't understand why Grandma is suddenly abandoning them." Abandoning them. The word stung because it touched on my deepest fear, that leaving would hurt Emma and Jake, that they would feel rejected or unloved because their grandmother chose her own well-being over their daily needs. "I'm not abandoning them," I said carefully. "I'm moving to a place where I can be their grandmother instead of their unpaid caretaker. They can visit me, stay for weekends, spend school holidays with me, but I won't be responsible for their daily care anymore." "That's not the same thing, and you know it," David said, his voice rising. "They need stability, consistency. You can't just uproot their entire routine because you're having some kind of midlife crisis. At 64, after 8 months of sleeping in a laundry room and being treated like hired help, wanting basic human dignity was apparently a psychological disorder. "David," I said, fighting to keep my voice level, "when was the last time you tucked your children into bed? When was the last time you helped them with homework or read them a bedtime story?" He shifted uncomfortably. "I work long hours to support this family, and I work long hours to maintain this family. The difference is that your work is valued, compensated, and respected. Mine is taken for granted. That's not fair, Mom. We appreciate—" "Do you? Then why are you more concerned about losing my services than losing me? Why is your first worry about who will pack lunches and do laundry instead of whether I'll be happy in my new life?" The question silenced him because we both knew the answer. To David, I had become a function rather than a person. My happiness was secondary to my usefulness, my well-being less important than my availability to solve his domestic problems. Tuesday and Wednesday passed in a blur of uncomfortable conversations and mounting panic. Sarah made increasingly desperate attempts to guilt me into staying, reminding me of Emma's upcoming school play, Jake's soccer tournament, the elaborate dinner party she'd planned for David's birthday. Each appeal revealed exactly how she saw my role in their lives. Not as a beloved family member whose presence enriched their lives, but as essential infrastructure whose absence would cause inconvenience. I spent those days quietly preparing for my departure while watching the family dynamics shift around my announced absence. Sarah snapped at David about minor household issues she'd previously expected me to handle. David came home from work to find dinner unprepared and children who needed attention he wasn't accustomed to providing. The smooth operation of their daily life was already showing cracks, and I hadn't even left yet. On Wednesday evening, I sat with Emma and Jake for what I knew would be our last bedtime story session in this house. Emma curled up against my side while Jake sat cross-legged on the floor, both of them absorbed in the fairy tale I was reading. These were the moments that made leaving hardest, not the cooking or cleaning or endless household management, but the simple joy of being needed by these two innocent children who loved me without conditions or expectations. "Grandma Rosa," Emma said when I closed the book, "Mommy says you're moving away. Are you mad at us?" My heart clenched. "Oh, sweetheart, I'm not mad at you at all. I love you and Jake more than anything in the world." "Then why are you leaving?" Jake asked, his serious brown eyes searching my face for answers I wasn't sure how to give. How do you explain to a 6-year-old, an 8-year-old that their grandmother is leaving because their parents treat her like a servant? How do you help children understand that love sometimes requires difficult choices, that staying in a situation that diminishes you ultimately serves no one? "Sometimes grown-ups need to make changes in their lives," I said carefully. "I'm moving to a house by the ocean where I can have my own space and my own garden, but that doesn't mean I love you any less." "Will we see you?" Emma's voice was small, worried. "Of course you will. You can come visit me for weekends and holidays. We'll walk on the beach and build sandcastles and read stories just like we do here." "But who will make our lunches?" Jake asked, and I had to smile at his practical concern. "Mommy and Daddy will take care of you. They're perfectly capable of making lunches and helping with homework and all the other things I've been doing." Both children looked skeptical about this assertion, which told me more about the family dynamics than any conversation with their parents had. Thursday arrived with the weight of finality. I'd packed my few belongings into 2 suitcases and a cardboard box, the sum total of my possessions after 64 years of life. It was humbling to realize how little I actually owned. How much of my identity had been tied up in other people's homes, other people's needs, other people's definitions of who I should be. Sarah spent the day in a frenzy of activity, calling babysitters, interviewing housekeepers, and generally discovering what many working parents know but often take for granted. Reliable domestic help is expensive, hard to find, and rarely available exactly when you need it. "The agency says they can send someone on Monday," she announced during dinner, "but she charges $40 an hour and can only work 3 days a week." David nearly choked on his food. $40 an hour? That's over $400 a week just for cleaning. "And that doesn't include childcare," Sarah added grimly, "or cooking or laundry, or any of the other things Rosa has been doing." They were finally beginning to understand the economic value of my labor, but only because they were facing the prospect of paying market rates for services I'd been providing for free. "Maybe we can manage with less help," David suggested hopefully. "I could pick up the kids from school a few days a week." "David, you work until 7 most nights. I have commitments during the day. We need reliable coverage." Sarah's voice was sharp with stress, "and the housekeeping alone is going to cost us at least $600 a week. $600 a week, over $30,000 a year for services I'd been providing without compensation while sleeping in their laundry room and being treated like an inconvenience." I listened to their conversation with growing amazement. Not once did either of them suggest that perhaps they should have valued my contributions more when they had them. Not once did they acknowledge that their current predicament was the result of taking my labor for granted while failing to treat me with basic respect. Friday morning dawned gray and drizzly, as if the weather was reflecting the mood in the house. I woke up early, made my last breakfast in that kitchen, and prepared for the goodbye I'd been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. The taxi was scheduled to arrive at 10 a.m. to take me to the bus station. From there, I would begin the journey to Elena's cottage and the new life I was choosing for myself. I'd spoken to Mr. Williamson, the lawyer, and everything was arranged. The utilities would be turned on, the keys would be waiting at the neighbor's house, and I would arrive to find a fully furnished home ready for me to begin again. At 9:30, I stood in the front hallway with my 2 suitcases and cardboard box, looking around at the house I'd helped make possible, but had never truly belonged in. The family photos that didn't include me smiled down from the walls, telling the story of a life I'd supported, but had never been part of. Emma and Jake appeared at the top of the stairs, both still in their pajamas, their faces puffy from sleep and tears. They'd been emotional all week, alternating between anger at my leaving and desperate attempts to convince me to stay. "Grandma Rosa," Emma said, her voice thick with tears, "I don't want you to go." I opened my arms and both children rushed down the stairs to hug me. For a moment, I wavered, thinking about how much easier it would be to stay, to continue being the invisible woman who made everyone else's life more comfortable while sacrificing her own dignity and independence. But then I thought about Elena's cottage, about waking up in a bed that was truly mine, about having conversations where people valued my thoughts rather than my domestic skills. I thought about the woman I used to be and the woman I could become if I had the courage to choose myself. "I love you both so much," I whispered into their hair, "and that's exactly why I have to do this. I want to be the kind of grandmother you can be proud of, not the kind who disappears a little more every day." Sarah appeared in the hallway, her expression carefully controlled. She'd been civil but cold all week, maintaining the facade of wounded dignity rather than acknowledging any responsibility for the situation. "Rosa," she said stiffly, "I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for." It was such a perfectly Sarah comment, implying that my dissatisfaction was some mysterious personal failing rather than a reasonable response to months of mistreatment. "I'm looking for basic human dignity," I replied calmly. "I think I have a good chance of finding it." David emerged from the kitchen, his face pale and drawn. He'd been the hardest to read all week, seeming genuinely conflicted between loyalty to his wife and guilt about his treatment of his mother. "Mom," he said, quietly, "are you sure about this? Once you leave, it's going to be hard to come back." The implications were clear. If I walked out this door, I would be choosing to sever the financial and practical ties that bound us together. There would be no more shared household, no more economic interdependence, no more assumption that family obligations flowed only in one direction. "I'm sure," I said. "And David, I'm not planning to come back. I'm planning to move forward." A car horn honked outside. My taxi had arrived. I picked up my suitcases, tucked the cardboard box under my arm, and headed for the door. Behind me, I could hear Emma crying and Jake asking why grown-ups had to make everything so complicated. At the door, I turned back one last time. David stood in the hallway looking lost. Sarah's face was a mask of controlled anger, and my grandchildren clung to each other as they watched their world change in ways they didn't understand. "I'll call when I get settled," I said. "Emma, Jake, remember that Grandma loves you no matter where she lives." Then I walked out the front door and into the rain, leaving behind 8 months of invisible servitude and 40 years of putting everyone else's needs before my own. The taxi driver helped me load my meager possessions into the trunk, and as we pulled away from the curb, I didn't look back. I'd spent too many years looking back, focusing on what I was losing instead of what I might gain. For the first time in decades, I was looking forward. The bus ride to Elena's cottage took 6 hours, but it felt like a journey through time, rather than just distance. With each mile that passed, I felt layers of resentment and exhaustion falling away, replaced by something I'd almost forgotten existed: hope. I thought about Elena during those hours, wondering what she would think of the choice I was making. She'd been the rebel in our family, the woman who never married, never had children, never conformed to anyone else's expectations about what a woman's life should look like. Maybe she'd left me her cottage because she understood something about the courage it takes to choose yourself when everyone else expects you to disappear. The cottage was everything the lawyer had promised, and more. White clapboard siding, blue shutters, a wraparound porch with rocking chairs overlooking a garden that was bursting with spring flowers. The neighbor, Mrs. Chen, had left fresh bread and a note welcoming me to the community. That first night, I slept in a real bed for the first time in 8 months. My own bed, in my own room, in my own house. The silence was profound. No washing machine humming, no footsteps overhead, no voices expecting me to respond to their needs. I woke up at sunrise and made coffee in my own kitchen, then sat on the porch watching the sun paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. For the first time in years, I had nowhere to be, except exactly where I was. No one to serve, no schedule to maintain, no expectations to meet except my own. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Meanwhile, back in the city, reality was setting in for the family I'd left behind. Sarah's carefully orchestrated life was unraveling without the invisible labor that had made it possible. David was discovering that work-life balance is much harder when you don't have a live-in domestic worker managing the home front. The housekeeper they'd hired lasted exactly 3 days before quitting, citing unrealistic expectations and hostile working conditions. The nanny they'd found for after-school care was reliable, but expensive, and she didn't cook or clean or manage the dozens of small tasks I'd handled without being asked. Within 2 weeks, their household expenses had increased by over $1,000, while their quality of life had decreased dramatically. David was coming home to chaos. Unmade beds, empty refrigerators, children who needed help with homework he didn't have time to provide. Sarah was furious, not because she missed me as a person, but because she was finally experiencing the true cost of running a household without exploiting someone's unpaid labor. She'd posted increasingly desperate messages on neighborhood forums, seeking reliable domestic help who could work for the below-market wages they'd grown accustomed to paying. But I was blissfully unaware of their struggles as I settled into my new life. I joined the local library's book club, started volunteering at the community garden, and slowly began to remember what it felt like to be valued for who I was, rather than what I could do for others. What's the longest you've ever stayed in a situation that was bad for you, just because leaving felt too scary? Sometimes the life you're afraid to start is exactly the one you need. A year passed, like a gentle dream. I settled into the rhythm of coastal living, where days were measured by tides rather than other people's demands, where my time belonged to me and my choices shaped my own happiness. The cottage became truly mine. I painted the kitchen sunshine yellow, planted tomatoes and herbs in the garden, and filled the rooms with books and music and the kind of comfortable silence that comes from being at peace with yourself. I made friends in the community, real friends who knew me as Rosa, the person rather than Rosa, the unpaid domestic worker. There was Margaret from the book club, who shared my love of mystery novels and made the most incredible blueberry scones. There was James, the retired teacher who helped me set up a small tutoring program for local children. And there was Peter, the widower next door, who became my companion for evening walks on the beach and quiet dinners where conversation flowed as easily as wine. Peter was the first man in decades to see me as a woman worth knowing, rather than a problem to be solved or a service to be utilized. He brought me flowers from his garden, listened to my stories about David and Emma and Jake without trying to fix anything, and slowly, carefully, helped me remember what it felt like to be cherished rather than merely useful. The children called every few weeks, their voices bright and excited as they told me about school and friends and the small dramas of their daily lives. I sent them postcards from the beach, care packages with seashells and local honey, and promised visits that we all looked forward to. Our relationship was different now, less intense but more genuine, built on love rather than necessity. David called too, though less frequently and always with an undertone of guilt that he couldn't quite shake. Their household had stabilized somewhat after several false starts with various housekeepers and nannies, but the cost of replacing my unpaid labor had been a wake-up call about the economic value of what they'd taken for granted. Sarah never called. One September afternoon, as I was reading on the porch while Peter worked in his garden next door, a familiar car pulled into my driveway. My heart jumped as I recognized David behind the wheel, with Emma and Jake pressed against the windows, waving excitedly. "Grandma Rosa!" Emma shrieked, tumbling out of the car before it had fully stopped. "We're here! We're finally here!" The children looked taller, more confident, their faces glowing with the health and happiness of childhood. They threw themselves into my arms with the pure joy of children who had been genuinely missed and were genuinely loved. David emerged from the car more slowly, carrying a bouquet of grocery store flowers and wearing the expression of a man who had come to make amends but wasn't sure how to begin. "Mom," he said quietly, "you look incredible." I smiled, knowing it was true. The stress lines around my eyes had softened, my posture was straighter, and I carried myself with the confidence of a woman who had reclaimed her own life. I was wearing a sundress I'd bought simply because I liked the color. My hair was styled the way I preferred it, and for the first time in years, I looked like someone who mattered to herself. "Thank you," I said simply. "Come in, I'll make coffee." As we settled in the living room, my living room where I was the hostess rather than the servant, David looked around with obvious amazement. The cottage was beautiful in its simplicity, filled with light and books and small treasures I'd collected during my year of independence. "This place is perfect," he said, and I could hear genuine wonder in his voice. "It's so peaceful." Emma and Jake had already claimed the window seat, fascinated by the view of the ocean and the garden where Peter was still working among his roses. "Who's that man, Grandma?" Jake asked with the direct curiosity of children. "That's Peter. He's my neighbor and my friend." "Is he your boyfriend?" Emma asked with a giggle. I felt myself blush slightly, which made both children dissolve into delighted laughter. "He's a very good friend," I said diplomatically. David was watching this exchange with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Mom, are you happy here?" It was such a simple question, but one he'd never thought to ask during those 8 months when I'd lived in his laundry room and served his family's every need. "Yes," I said without hesitation. "I'm very happy here." "I'm glad," he said, and I could tell he meant it. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened, about how we treated you. Sarah and we talked about it." "Oh?" I kept my voice neutral, not wanting to make this conversation easier for him than it needed to be. "We were wrong, Mom. We took advantage of your generosity, and we treated you like—" He struggled for the words. "Like you weren't important. Like you didn't matter except for what you could do for us." It was the acknowledgement I'd needed but never expected to receive. Not an excuse or a justification, but a simple admission of wrongdoing. "Thank you for saying that," I said quietly. "Sarah wanted to come today," he continued, though something in his tone suggested this might not be entirely true. She's struggling with some things, learning to manage the household, dealing with the kids' schedules. She says she wants to apologize." I nodded but didn't respond. Sarah's struggles were no longer my responsibility to solve, and her apologies, if they ever came, would need to be earned rather than simply expected. The afternoon passed in the kind of relaxed family time I'd dreamed of during those months of invisible servitude. We walked on the beach, built sandcastles, collected shells, and had a picnic dinner on the porch while watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. The children were fascinated by everything: the way the lighthouse beam swept across the water, the sound of waves against the rocks, the simple pleasure of having their grandmother's undivided attention without competing with endless household tasks. As evening approached, and it came time for them to leave, Emma threw her arms around my neck and whispered, "I wish we could stay forever." "You can come back anytime," I promised. "Summer vacation is only 9 months away, and you could spend 2 whole weeks here if your parents agree." Both children turned to David with pleading eyes, and he nodded immediately. "We'll work something out. They should spend time here, see what you've built." what I'd built. It was such a simple phrase, but it carried weight because David finally understood that I had built something here. Not just a living situation, but a life that belonged to me, that reflected my choices and values and dreams. After they left, I sat on the porch in the gathering darkness, listening to the waves and processing the emotional complexity of the day. Peter appeared with 2 glasses of wine and settled into the rocking chair beside me. "How was the visit?" he asked gently. "Better than I expected," I said honestly. David has grown up a lot this year. Having to manage his own household without exploiting someone else's labor has been educational for him. "And how are you feeling about it all?" I considered the question seriously. A year ago, I would have been angry, bitter, focused on all the ways they'd wronged me and all the time I'd lost. But sitting in my own space, surrounded by the life I'd chosen and the peace I'd found, those emotions felt distant and unimportant. "Grateful," I said finally. If they hadn't pushed me to my breaking point, I might never have found the courage to leave. I might have spent the rest of my life disappearing a little more each day, until there was nothing left of Rosa Martinez except a collection of useful functions. Peter reached over and took my hand, his touch warm and reassuring in the cool evening air. "You saved yourself," he said simply. "That takes incredible courage." 6 months later, David called with news that surprised me. Sarah had started working part-time at an art gallery downtown, partly because they needed the income to pay for household help, but partly because she was discovering she needed something in her life beyond managing other people's domestic labor. "She's actually really good at it," David said, and I could hear genuine pride in his voice. "She has an eye for design and she's great with customers. I think she was bored before, looking for ways to feel important by controlling everything at home." It was an insight that might have been useful a year earlier, but I was glad Sarah was finding her own purpose rather than trying to live vicariously through controlling mine. Emma and Jake did spend 2 weeks with me that summer, and it was one of the most joyful experiences of my life. We went whale watching, learned to kayak, had reading marathons on rainy days, and baked enough cookies to feed the entire neighborhood. They met all my friends, charmed Peter completely, and left with promises to return the following year. Most importantly, they saw their grandmother as a whole person, someone with interests and friendships and choices, someone who was valued and respected in her community, someone who had built a life worth living. As I write this, it's been 2 years since I walked out of that laundry room and chose myself. 2 years since I stopped believing that love requires you to disappear, that family means sacrificing your dignity, that being useful is more important than being happy. Elena's cottage is truly mine now, filled with memories and laughter and the kind of deep contentment that comes from living authentically. Peter and I are talking about marriage. Not because either of us needs saving, but because we've both learned the difference between choosing someone and needing someone. David visits regularly now, usually with the children, but sometimes alone, and our relationship has evolved into something more honest and balanced. He's learned to ask about my life, rather than just updating me on his, and I've learned to set boundaries rather than just giving endlessly. Sarah and I maintain a polite distance. She sends birthday cards and holiday greetings, and I respond with equal courtesy. But we both understand that some relationships can't be repaired, only managed. That's okay. Not every story needs a complete reconciliation to have a happy ending. The most important thing I've learned is this: it's never too late to choose yourself. It's never too late to remember that your life has value beyond what you can provide for other people. It's never too late to walk away from situations that diminish you, even when those situations involve people you love. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable other people's bad behavior. Sometimes the healthiest choice is to stop setting yourself on fire to keep others warm. Sometimes saving yourself isn't selfish. It's the only way to model what self-respect looks like for the people who matter most. I look back on that woman who slept in a laundry room and accepted crumbs of dignity, and I feel compassion for her desperation, her loneliness, her fear of being completely alone. But I also feel proud of her strength, her resilience, and ultimately, her courage to choose a different ending. If you're listening to this story and recognizing yourself in it, if you're living in your own version of a laundry room, literal or metaphorical, please know that you have choices, even when it doesn't feel like it. You deserve to be treated with respect and dignity. You deserve to have your contributions valued and acknowledged. You deserve to live a life that belongs to you, not a life spent in service to people who take your sacrifices for granted. It might be scary to walk away from the familiar, even when the familiar is painful. It might feel impossible to start over, especially if you're older or have limited resources or are afraid of being alone. But I promise you this: the life you build for yourself on your own terms, with your own choices, is worth every moment of uncertainty it takes to claim it. Elena knew that when she left me her cottage. She was giving me more than money and property. She was giving me permission to remember that I mattered, that my happiness counted, that my story didn't have to end in invisible servitude just because that's where it had gotten stuck. Now I wake up every morning in my own bed, in my own house, and I choose how to spend my time. Some days I volunteer at the library. Some days I work in my garden. Some days I do absolutely nothing except sit on my porch and watch the waves, marveling at the simple miracle of belonging to myself. That's what freedom looks like. Not the absence of responsibility or connection, but the presence of choice. The ability to say yes because you want to, and no because you need to. The right to be valued for who you are, not just what you can provide. If this story touched your heart, if you know someone who needs to hear it, if you've ever felt invisible in your own life, please share it. Like this video, subscribe to hear more stories of courage and transformation, and tell me in the comments, what's one small step you could take today to choose yourself? Sometimes the journey to freedom begins with a single decision to believe you're worth fighting for. Your life matters. Your happiness counts. And it's never, ever too late to write a different ending. Thank you for listening to my story. May you find the courage to write your own.